I remember about many things about reed and marshes, including the jelly-like nature of the bloody material, was that you had what we referred to as a Molly Malone sort of cart thing there. And I'm trying to remember exactly. We knew that there was a large amount of B17 somewhere under all that jelly, and I'm just wondering if what your memories are of trying to find the damn thing.
Yes, we actually tried a couple of instruments on that site that we don't normally use on Time Team. The cart you're talking about on wheels sort of had a red square frame, with a couple of coils inside, and that's an electromagnetic instrument. It's called an an EM61.
Okay.
And I think I'm right in saying that Sue Overton did most of that work.
That's right. It was you and Sue as a team there, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it was also a special occasion where we invited along Professor Arnold Aspinall, who was the head of archaeological sciences at Bradford University. He's sadly passed away now, but he did a couple of Time Teams, and basically it, at the time, was one of the world authorities in archaeological geophysics. He was my tutor, mentor, and he started work in Bradford in the 1960s and was one of the pioneers. And really, archaeological geophysics managed to thrive because of his early research, along with people at English Heritage and a few others.
And he developed that white tubular, what we used to call the Zimmer frame thing, did he? Was he on the technical side as well?
No, not so much. He was more. He applied his knowledge and was involved with others making instruments, but he didn't build them himself. He was very much a physicist who became involved in archaeology in the 70s and worked with people like Peter Adderman from York. They did a lot of collaborative work. And Arnold worked with a lot of the physicists who were doing research in not just archaeological geophysics, but other aspects, dating, analysis of artifacts. And Bradford was really at the forefront in those early decades.
And people forget, John, don't they, how relatively short time ago people were lugging boxes the size of a refrigerator over the ground and bouncing up and down and not getting terribly wonderful results. But then suddenly it seemed to accelerate, possibly, as you say, with the Bradford guys doing it and you and Chris's work and all the rest of it. What was the machine that made the difference for you? Was there one thing that was a big jump?
I think the big jump was using the magnetometers. Those are the H-framed instruments. They sort of have two vertical, like, light bulbs. What am I trying to say? Tubes, vertical tubes. It looks a bit like a rugby post, but scaled down quite a lot. Once those became automated, hooked up to recorders, and then having data loggers built inside, it meant that we could collect huge amounts of data. And the more data you collected, the better the picture you'd got of what was below the ground, because you could understand the background geology and changes that were natural as opposed to those which were archaeological.
And that one, what date did that come along in, John, approximately?
Well, they were first invented in the 60s and 70s, but really they didn't come into their own until the 1980s. And it was from there on. But to be honest, the biggest impact, I still believe this, and lots of people agree. Once Time Team arrived on the scene and people started to see archaeological geophysics, once people started to see archaeological geophysics in action, then people like developers actually said, well, hold it. We're being told we've got to pay for trenching, and they're going in and trenching, but they're just doing it blind. Why aren't we having one of these surveys done that give us an idea of what's there, and then we go and test that rather than wasting lots of money? Yeah. And so Time Team revolutionised, in a way, a big way, developer-funded archaeology.
And it seemed to me that one of the great changes I remember was, thinking back in those early days in Athelney, when you had a considerable beard and we all look very different from the way we look now. But that transition with the dot matrix printer printing it out, but then beginning to get software that effectively gave us a plan of what we were looking at in great detail. And that gradually began to lead in the area of radar, GPR. Was that the sort of next big jump for you?
That was the big jump. And again, I think the involvement of Time Team in carrying out GPR surveys in green fields was the start of a big change in the way radar surveys are carried out. Previous work had been done in urban locations, simply because it was known that radar was good at detecting things at depth. The only problem with urban situations is that the archaeology is very complex, and unless you've got massive wall structures, foundations at depth, it's very difficult to understand exactly what you're seeing. When you go into greenfield, rural areas with radar, the archaeology isn't usually so complex, and you get much clearer pictures and depth information that can be very, very accurate.
So we were beginning to see structures almost I remember the first time you were doing those slices through things, and then it became a three-dimensional model that you could manipulate, and we were almost seeing, a structure with walls, basements, rooms in 3D from the radar software.
Yes, and Jimmy Adcock did some fantastic work. He worked with specialist software developers who were working with radar software, and he managed to do the processing in quite short periods of time, which just simply wasn't possible 5 years earlier.
Yes, because
multiple computers were, the advancement, the bigger memories and the bigger processors really helped the progress of radar.
Because it was one of the sort of difficulties, in a sense, of Time Team, that no sooner had you gone out and done your survey that someone bright spark like me or whoever would be saying, when can we see it? We want to see it now. In terms of commercial turnaround, you would do the survey and then a few weeks have a processing period and then an analysis period, and then a couple of weeks or so later you might cough up the results, whereas we were you did it at coffee time and we wanted it by lunchtime.
Yes, I think we made it look too easy, the fact we could do that, because fortunately most of the time everything worked well. Yes. It was only the odd occasions when Jimmy forgot to bring batteries and things like that there were mishaps. But on the whole, the technology worked, the software processing was done quickly, and as you say, we managed to do instant interpretations. And the beauty from our point of view, the condensed timescale meant that seeing trenches go in on our anomaly and seeing what exactly was causing them was absolutely fantastic. We normally didn't get to see what our results actually meant, archaeologically speaking. As you say, we do a report, having done the survey, and it would be several months, if not a year or two, before any archaeological excavations were carried out. And the only time we'd get to hear from the archaeologists were if we got something wrong.
And this enabled you to manipulate various aspects of your kit to adapt according to what you were seeing in the trenches.
Yes, I mean, we started to understand for the first time why sort of certain bricks, like Tudor bricks, didn't necessarily show well with the radar surveys.
Yeah.
And if a wall was made up of a section of Tudor brick and then a section of flint, you'd get the clear section of flint wall foundation, but wouldn't necessarily see the brick, depending on the moisture content. And I don't think people had been aware of that at the time.
I have a question. I know it's always been a thing that you occasionally see in archaeological magazines and things, that at some point in the distant future there's going to be some magic machine that is just so accurate and so good that we won't need to dig anymore. How do you feel about that?
Well, I don't think we're far off. You know, combining different techniques is the way forward. The fact we can now do radar over large landscapes, the same as we can with magnetometry, which we've done for decades, combining those two data sets and perhaps combining them with electromagnetic surveys of the type we did over the aeroplane, the more, that's the way forward. Multi-sensors on a machine. It's being done in farming now, surprisingly. Farmers are using tractors controlled by GPS, and attached to the tractors are various sensors that will measure the moisture content of the soil, tell them where crop growth is greater, and they can actually alter the amount of fertiliser they put on the fields according to the varying measurements. All we need to do is attach lots of archaeological sensors to the tractors, and we're made.
But
we
it
can
seems
sit in the pub and get the data fed into us automatically from remote distances.
But from a digger's point of view, I always quite like the fact that you were prepared to say there was an anomaly there, but it was required, you know, to archaeologically excavate it, to see the condition of that material, get some sense of possibly dating material from pottery from a trench that the wall was cut into, and that there's certain things that you can't get at with geophysics.
Yes, when it comes to the crunch, you've got to excavate and to understand fully what you're seeing in the geophysics. We can tell you that it's a Roman villa. We could probably, from the design, say, well, it's 1st century or 4th century, and certain rooms are going to be bathhouses, certain areas are going to have mosaics in them. We can provide a lot of information like that, but accurate dating and a full understanding of the archaeology, no, you're still going to have to dig.
And to take you back to Reed and Marshes, there you were with apparently 2 huge B-17 bombers, a few tons of metal lying there underneath. And my memory is it was quite a bit of a difficult task to find any of it in the first day or so.
I think the main problem was the terrain, the nature of the marshes, and physically being able to walk over the ground.
Yeah.
We got some very clear signals from the main bulk of the aircraft, but investigating areas beyond that was very difficult. The ideal situation would have been to have a drone flying at low level with sensors attached to the drone, and that would have enabled a far easier and better survey.
And
that technology didn't exist at the time.
Sorry, and that's That's what you'd probably have today. I mean, if we were heading out today and you were throwing all the usual kit in the back of the van, what stuff is around today that you would have taken to Reedham, say, or anywhere else on Time Team that you could now have that we didn't have then?
Well, anything that you could attach to a drone that's legal.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, at the moment, the use of radar in airborne situations is not permitted in Europe, and certainly not within Britain, although we've left technically Europe.
Why is that, John? What's the problem with it?
Basically, the radar can interfere with so many different things on the ground, communications, and basically Ofcom very much control the use of radar. You can't use it in certain areas of the country near certain research establishments, and areas, say like Jodrell Bank, where they're doing measurements with powerful telescopes and so on. The radar can interfere with a lot of that work. In the vicinity of airports as well, it can affect communications. So it's very much controlled at the moment, and whereas when it's used on the ground, the depth of penetration of the radar is, depending on the antenna you use, 1-2 meters. Usually when you're working in archaeological situations, obviously much deeper if you're looking for geological changes. But the main difference is you've got contact with the ground and the energy goes into the ground. Right. Once you go into the air, the energy is dispersed in all different directions, and that's when you get the greater interference.
Do you remember when the first stuff began to come out of the ground in Norfolk, the first remains of the bombers? Because it was always seemed to me the irony of this huge amounts of metal were there somewhere, and at one point I thought, crikey, can we really not find any of this material? But I think gradually can you remember when it started to come out?
Yes, I think it's the first time I personally had seen the recovery of an aircraft using large machines.
Yeah.
And getting your head around that was quite difficult. But you realised in the sort of landscapes they were working and investigating that it was the only way to do the work. It wasn't the sort of thing where you could just go in with spades and so on, because of the depth of the material, the overburden was quite considerable, and because of the swampy nature of the ground. What
was frightening was when we went through that top crust almost. I mean, it was a maybe 5 metre crust or something. You then went into something that looked like pure liquid jelly. And the thought of losing anybody or anything into that, that gave me nightmares for a few weeks afterwards.
Yeah, it's strange. Because we were doing experimental work with the instruments Sue Overton was working with, and with Arnold's special metal detector that he'd adapted, I think we spent more time actually doing the geophysics than actually looking at the finds and looking at the trenches, and also because it was a bit dangerous, as you say. So we concentrated in our own areas away from a lot of the work on site.
And was there one piece of the plane that turned up away from where we thought that you managed to locate? Was there a sort of an outlying bit of it?
I'll be honest, I can remember some very clear results that Sue got, and Arnold got similar sort of anomalies, and we produced a report on that. There were 1 or 2 outliers, but I think it was decided that it wasn't possible to investigate them all.
And what for you was the most sort of memorable bits that came out? Was there a point at which you thought, good grief, that was only not that long ago, really?
Yes, I mean, the fact you're dealing with something, within somebody's lifetime who's still alive, it's not sort of normal archaeology. It's not the sort of work we do, on a regular basis. I think it brings home the tragedy of war, etc. I think what was so surprising is it was such a large plane, but from a geophysics point of view, a lot of it wasn't detectable because of the nature of the way it's constructed,
right,
and the materials used.
Alloys, you mean?
Alloys, which you can detect electromagnetically, but in this instance, there's not a lot that came out of the magnetometer. All the magnetometer would pick up are the ferrous, the iron components. So that would be, say, like the guns or so on. The propellers were aluminium, I believe, and the fuselage similar. So we didn't get a sort of picture of a plane as such. It was just odd blobs which represented bits of metal, and it was very difficult to actually know what sort of metal was going to come out. I seem to remember now, thinking back, we got an L-shaped piece of some specialist section of the plane, which when the experts were on site and recovered it, they were quite excited because they knew exactly what it was. I think it was L-shaped or Z-shaped.
Yes, I think there was a bracket that held what they call the Tokyo tanks, which were extra fuel tanks put on the B-17s, which in theory, when they were originally built, should have allowed them to fly to Japan and back. And this bracket, having that wonderful American guy there to tell us which bits were which, was fantastic. John, I've often asked you this question, 25 years or more of Time Team, probably one time or another, of all those sites, which site sticks in your mind the most? Which one made you think, wow, geophys really has pulled off something here?
I think it has to be the first one we ever did, Athelney. Because the results were so spectacular and you just weren't expecting that. And to get such a clear plan of the Abbey complex back in 92, 93, it was amazing. I mean, the story behind that site is that English Heritage had done their own geophysics some 6 years earlier on the same site, and they found absolutely nothing. So when Mick told us we were going to Athelney, we thought, brilliant. They choose a site where geophysics hasn't worked in the past, and this is going to be our first opportunity on television to show how the techniques can work. But it did work, and it worked spectacularly, and that's why I think we were all amazed. The reason when English Heritage did the work, they didn't see it, is because they did the work in the height of summer, and they were doing electrical resistance survey, and there was no moisture contrast. The ground was very dry, and so the dry soil gave the same electrical properties as the dry stone foundations. We did the survey, I think I'm right in saying in spring, or was it autumn? I can't remember now, but there was a really good moisture contrast. The soil was wet and the stone foundations were dry, and that's why we got the clear picture. And that's why we can take fun out of English Heritage still 25 years later.
And that was one of many of those magic moments which I think you delivered on Time Team, which was us wandering back originally to the boot of your car where you had your dot matrix printer. And Mick, I remember that moment of Mick saying, "Whoa, look at that!" with such excitement, and over 200 programs. I can remember so many moments when the geophysics rabbit out of the hat was one of those fantastic. It always felt like a sort of magic, Here's a field, guess what's under it, bang, and those were great moments.
Yes, and to be involved with that, it just really did catch the excitement, and it was genuine excitement. People still ask me today when they bump into me, "Did you do it all in 3 days? Didn't you go and do the geophysics in advance?" And I said, I'd be honest and say we probably went in advance on 1 or 2 sites where they were scheduled by English Heritage, and there was agreement that English Heritage wanted the survey doing before the programme, so they had time to think about. But we made that clear on the programme. Yeah. The rest of the time, the geophysics was done. Well, when we started on a Tuesday, the geophysics would be done on the Tuesday, and it would all be wrapped up by the Thursday of that week.
And tell me this, John. Most archaeologists I talk to and geophysicists, they've got some site that they've carried in their back pocket or in their imagination for a long time and think, well, if I used all this equipment I've got now and all this new technology, I would absolutely love to go and do that site if we could get permission or wherever. Have you got a couple of sites like that?
Well, the site I'd love to go back to and complete the survey would be Brancaster. That was one of the last surveys we did on Time Team, and it gave us spectacular radar results. It was the first time we started to do a large-scale radar survey, and Jimmy got amazing results. And the fort is there. It's owned by the National Trust. It's under pasture. It's just waiting. We only did about a third of the site. I'd love to go and see the other 2/3 to plan in 3D a whole Roman fort. Yes, that's what I'd long to do.
And I know that Angus and National Trust and a lot of the people involved with that site would actually really love that to happen. I've had 1 or 2 other chats with people about that. So what I suggest is next time we talk, you and I put together a team in our fantasy virtual Time Team, and we'll see who you want to bring along, past, present and future, and put a reasonable amount of money aside for the bar bill, obviously, and we'll see what we can do at some point next year once we surface from all of this, maybe.
Well, Jimmy's only small, he doesn't drink that much. So.
Well, John, lovely talking to you, and thank you very much for 20, 25 years, very jolly, very many fine evenings with you and your various teams. And as I always say to you, and I always said to people, Time Team was fundamentally a geophysical evaluation dig. And geophysics was at the heart, with beer, yeah. Lovely.
Yeah, don't forget the beer, that helped a lot.
Okay, John, well, stay well. Thank you very much, and good luck. Thank you.
Again.
Bye.
Bye.